Hi guys, welcome back to Crochet Hangout, and today we're going to continue a lesson with adding layers to our circle. In the last lesson we learned how to make the magic 8 or how to begin any sort of crochet circle. There's actually other ways of doing it, so today we're going to start with something a little different. I'm using my favorite yarn. This is impeccable acrylic yarn. It's super soft and it's pretty cheap in the store. And I'm also using a size J hook, which is really the most versatile size hook that you can use for any sort of hat or blanket or any sort of, typical sized yarn. So first, we're going to start by making a slip knot. So we're going to cross over there, and then we're going to pull this through and then make a slip knot like so. It's a little bit big, so we're going to make it a little bit smaller here by pulling on that end and size it to the size J hook. Alright, so now that we've got a nice tail and a nice piece of yarn, we're going to crochet, we're going to chain 2. You can do 2 or 3 stitches to begin, but I like to choose 2 because if you make 3, especially if you're making a hat, you don't want the top of the hat to have a hole that's too big unless you're going to be putting a pom-pom on top or some sort of decoration. Or you make one of those hats where you can stick a ponytail through the top, but it looks kind of weird if you leave something in the diameter of the circle is a couple of centimeters. So we'll just start with 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to do half double crochets today because they're really versatile for making any sort of hat or if you're doing a rug or any sort of circle. So we're going to yarn over and then go into the second chain from the hook since you only have 2. Then you're going to pull through, you're going to yarn over again and pull through all 3 loops. And we're going to do 8 of those into the circle since that is the typical number for putting into and starting a hat. So that's 1, then go 2, 3, 4, 5, so you can still see there, and then 6, and then 7, and then 8. Alright, so now that we've got 8, you can see here we've got 8 stitches in a single chain stitch. So the circle isn't that too big in the middle, which is nice, and when you pull it together to make your first row, it's going to get even smaller, so you really won't be able to see the gap there if you're worried about that. So there are 2 types of adding layers to your circle that you can do. You can do it in round, which means that you're just going to continually crochet, not worry about each row, and you can, if you're counting rows and following a pattern, then you can mark each row by using something like a paper clip or a bobby pin even, and there are special stitch markers that you can buy in stores like AC Moore or Michael's or even on Etsy. There are some really cute ones. I just use paper clips because they're super cheap, and obviously they come in humongous tubs and I lose them all the time, so they're great for marking rows when I don't need to worry about using a slip stitch at the end of each row. But since that's super easy when you don't count rows, we're going to work on the second type of adding a row, which is using slip stitches at the end of each layer. So what we're going to do is, since we have this, you have to finish off this first row. So we started off with a double crochet, or a half double crochet anyway. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the top of the stitch, which is right there. Top of the stitch, you're going to go through, grab the yarn like so, and then pull it all the way through. So now that we've got, you can see here, it's just a little small circle. And when you start at the beginning of each row, what you want to do is begin with a chain, and the number of chains that you begin depends on the size of the stitch. Single crochets only require 1 chain. Half double is usually 1 or 2. Double crochet is 2, and a treble crochet, if you're going really fancy, is usually 3. I like to do 2 chain stitches for my half double crochets because I think depending on how loose or your style of crocheting, I tend to crochet a little bit looser so my stitches are bigger, and so I like to do 2 chains. So what we're going to do is chain 2. You can do 1 or 2 depending on whatever size you want to do, and then we're going to begin adding layers. So when you're adding layers, you're going to want to increase. It's important to increase in the first couple of rows because if you don't, it's going to start curling over and it's going to turn into this little tube looking thing that's going to ball up like that, and if you're trying to make a hat, it's not going to work. So for the first row, what we're going to do is do 2 half double crochets in each one. So since we chained 2, that counts as the first half double crochet in every row. And that's really important to remember because if you don't think of that as a half double crochet, you're going to be unconsciously adding 2 extra stitches to every row, and then your hat's gonna get funky. So in each stitch, we're going to do 2 half double crochets. 2, 1, 2, and if you don't remember to do 2 in each, it's not a huge deal, and you can always go back and add more in the other rows, but it will affect how your hat looks. And another thing to keep in mind is that every row, if you're increasing, doesn't necessarily get 2 stitches in each because then it starts looking kind of wavy. And then it's not going to be the shape that you want. Hats can be super finicky, circles can be super finicky because if you accidentally add more stitches to one side, it gets lopsided, and then it just doesn't look like what you're trying to make, and it can be a really frustrating experience. Alright, so we started out with 8 half double crochets in the first round, and now we had 2, so that we have 16 in total in this second round. So now that we've reached the end of our row, you can see we're back to that first 2 chain that we made. And so when you are ending a row, you want to use the second chain. So the top of the stitch, we're going to go into it like it's a half double crochet. A little tight there. And then grab through and do a slip stitch. So you're just going to grab that yarn and then pull it all the way through in the second round. And now for the second row, we're going to do 2 half double crochets in one stitch and then 1 half double crochet in the next one. So that way it's like an alternating pattern, and it really helps keep the increase going, but it's not as severe as adding 2 double crochets, half double crochets into each stitch. So again, we're going to chain 2, and then in the first stitch, we're going to add 1 half double crochet. So this counts as 2 half double crochets in the first stitch. So now we're going to do 1 half double crochet, and then 2 half double crochets in the next one. And we're going to continue that pattern all the way around. There we go. And if you lose count of how many stitches that you're doing, just try to pay attention to the pattern. It can be, if you start accidentally doing a bunch of 2 half double crochets in each stitch, it's going to get lopsided. So it's important to pay attention to how many you're putting into each stitch. And circles can be kind of hypnotizing because you're not really reaching the end of a row and turning like you would in like a rectangular piece. Like a blanket or like a washcloth or something like that. So you really have to pay attention, especially if you're doing in round, because then you tend to lose track, especially if you don't use a paper clip, and then you're really not doing what you're probably aiming to do. Okay. So now we are back to the 2 chains that we originally did. They are right here. So there is the second one on top. So what we're gonna do is do a slip stitch into that one. All right, so now you are 3 rows in. We did to reiterate, we did 8 half double crochets into the middle of our chain. And then we did 2 half double crochets into each stitch for the second row. And then we did 2 half double crochets and then 1 half double crochet into our third row.